Welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast, episode 16, Growing the Choral Pie with Beth Philemon. In this episode, I had a blast chatting with Beth Philemon of the Choir Baton podcast and Instagram takeover account about many concepts related to the business of the choral profession. We hit on scarcity mentality and the fixed pie fallacy of economics, all the way to being more mindful of the products we create with our students. I am also excited to feature the first ever Composer Exposer episode, featuring composer Tim Takash. Tim is also the co-founder of Graphite Publishing, which is our newest sponsor on the show, and I am super excited to welcome them aboard and create this partnership with them just in time for back to school. Graphite Publishing, for me, has been a savior in my everyday, real-life work world. I can't even tell you how many times. See if this sounds familiar. You have waited until the day before the students arrive to pick just that exact right piece that you need for your choir, and Graphite has the solution because, of course, you can go on their website and have the music in your hands instantly for a very reasonable price, mostly about $1.50 per score. You can print them, and you can have them in your kids' hands tomorrow. One of my other favorite things about Graphite is your ability to search all of the different composers and pieces of music on the website by criteria like difficulty level, voicing, instrumental accompaniment. Is there a violin solo? There's all types of things in their awesome search engine, which I think is unique actually in the world of online publishing. So I'm excited to have them aboard. So head over to Graphite Publishing, that's graphitepublishing.com, and use the Choralosophy checkout code that you're accustomed to get 10% off on your order from Graphite Publishing. Composers like Tim Takash, Jocelyn Hagan, Eric Barnum, and many, many more. To celebrate this new partnership with the podcast, we have created a new segment that's going to happen once a month. I'm going to find graphite composers and strong-arm them into participating in this fun little 5-minute segment you're about to hear called Composer Exposer. Tim Takash decided to be our first guinea pig and try this out, and I hope you enjoy this little segment. Immediately following will be the interview with Beth Philemon. Welcome, Tim Takash. You are the first guest on a new segment on the Choralosophy podcast called Composer Exposer, and we're going to expose you to the audience of choral music today in a way they may not have been exposed to you before. So we're going to start out with some rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
Yeah, sounds frightening, but I'm ready.
Okay. What's the favorite thing that you have hanging in your closet right now?
My favorite thing right now is a purple Conspirare t-shirt.
Wow, very specific. I like it. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
When I was young, my mom told me that if I liked to do something, it never mattered if anybody else thought it was the right or wrong thing to do. As long as I wanted to do it, as long as I liked it, then it was good to go.
Sounds like someone's training you to be an artist. That's great.
I think so.
Do you have any pets?
Yes, I have 2 cats. One is named Shortcake and one is named Glissando. Sorry.
Okay. That's great. What is your favorite movie ever?
I grew up as a huge Star Wars nerd, and so there's a part of my heart that is reserved for Star Wars. And these days, my guilty pleasure is horror movies. So I'm awaiting the next chapter of it.
Awesome. What is your biggest pet peeve?
I can't stand it when you're trying to get to know somebody and they're just a veneer of friendliness, and you can't actually figure out what they're like and who they are and what they value. It just seems like they're sort of a social chameleon. It drives me bonkers because I want to get to know people. I want to figure out what makes them tick. When I can't get through there, it drives me nuts.
Dark chocolate or milk chocolate?
Milk.
If you were not in the choral music industry, what would you be doing?
I'd be doing graphic design.
Ah, okay. What's on your playlist right now?
I have quite a lot of Sting and the Police songs stacked up.
All right, name a book you read that positively impacted or shaped you.
I am in the middle of a series called The Expanse, which is a sci-fi series, and it's James S.A. Corey is the pen name for these 2 writers, and it's the most exciting, mind-blowing sci-fi that I've read in a long time.
If you had a spirit animal, what would it be?
I don't know. Is that supposed to reflect like who I am on the inside?
According to some people, it like really matters.
Oh gosh.
No pressure.
No pressure. But those people who believe in this stuff are going to get mad if I blow it off. So my spirit animal would be sort of like a big, friendly tiger.
Oh, a friendly tiger. Oh,
I guess, yeah, like a cuddly one.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
Well, Tim, congratulations. You have survived the gauntlet of rapid fire questions.
Yeah, I don't know that I did very well, but I gave it my best.
I think you did a valiant effort. That was
Okay.
good. So let's switch gears to music and tell us what is the most exciting project that you have either recently published or are working on publishing for choral nerds out there.
I am working on publishing a big project from this last season called Helios, which was a 65-minute evening-length a cappella choral suite of music inspired by the solar system. So the piece starts out way in the outer rim of the solar system with Pluto, and we're working our way through the solar system planet by planet until we get to the sun finally at the end.
That sounds exciting. Important question. Will you be quoting any Holst at any point during the work?
There is no Holst quoted. I know some of that piece, but I purposely did not go and listen to it because I didn't want that in my brain.
Smart.
I also wanted to just approach it from my own sensibilities. And the only thing I did, when we think of Mars, we think of the god of war, and we think of that pulsing beat, that rhythm. We think of the Imperial March, right, from Star Wars. And I knew I did not want to go that direction. And so that movement in particular was a decision to go to the opposite direction of that. And so Mars is sung by the tenors and basses, and it's a twist on what it means to be masculine. So I approached a poet with that idea and said, can we look at masculinity in the same way? And as like I mentioned before, we have this, a lot of times as men, we have this veneer up, like we have this bravado that we put on because we're trying to figure out what it means to be a man, what people assume we should look like or act like.
I don't know what you're talking about.
But you have to crack that surface, right? You've got to scratch through it to see what's underneath.
Oh, that's such a great idea. Do you have a target date for publishing?
Yeah, I should. So the premiere was in May, and there were 3 shows. And this summer, I've been meaning to sit down and go back into the score and change all the things that we changed and edits that we made, during the rehearsals. So I'm going to say September 15th. That's it. You heard it here. September 15th, I'm going to have Helios online ready to buy.
Mid-September, you can go to Graphite Publishing and check that out, along with some other great composers and awesome choral music selections on there. And thank you, Tim, for coming on and participating in this first Composer Exposer. Brought to you by Graphite Publishing, which is super exciting. And I've just perfect to have you on as the first guest. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks, Chris.
Of course, we don't want to forget in this last episode, before most of you go back to school, the opportunity to get signed up for Sight Reading Factory for you and all of your students. It is worth it. Trust me. It will revolutionize what you do in the classroom with your ability to access literacy for all students, which I think most of us agree is a goal and should be a goal. So head over to sightreadingfactory.com and enter the code Choralosophy for 10% off of your order there, and get your kids set up with a great tool. If you're not sure how to use something like sightreadingfactory.com to improve the literacy of your students, don't forget there is a wealth of knowledge now on the Choralosophers Facebook group. I would encourage you to join there and ask people how they use products like Sight Reading Factory to impact their students. It's also a great place to talk about topics that you heard about on this show. Maybe something you just don't agree with, maybe something that you think is revolutionary and phrased in a way you've never heard before. These are the places that we want to have conversations with full context, which, as you know, is always the goal. There might be things on this upcoming episode that you don't like, that you don't think is an accurate way of presenting. I'll have my big boy pants on that website. Join Choralosophers Facebook group and let's talk it out. The main thing is the assumption of good faith and context. If we keep those 2 things going, then we can have productive conversations that make our profession better. One of those productive conversations is coming up next with Beth Philemon of the Choir Baton podcast.
Well, welcome everybody.
Welcome to the Choralosophy podcast and the Choir Baton podcast.
Yeah, we are joining forces for a fun co-episode.
It's going to be great. I'm here with Beth Philemon. Philemon?
And I'm Philemon.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm here with Chris Muntz.
That's right. And we were just talking before about how your name is like a book in the Bible that I did not recognize. And so when I started to pronounce your name, I wanted to then say Philemon. And so then I got confused. So I'll get it eventually as we get to know each other. I'm much better with faces than names anyway. How about you?
The exact same. It's one of my biggest weaknesses as a choir director is remembering people's names. I can tell you their whole history, what they had for lunch, even if they told me 2 weeks ago, but their first names will sometimes just elude me.
Yep. Yeah. And I've been teaching for, this will be 16 years. And I have kids, former students now that are in their 30s, and I'll see them in the grocery store around town. And I know exactly who that they were in my class, but I don't know their name, unless of course they were one of the really good kids or one of the really bad kids.
Exactly. That's where I feel like it's very convenient being in the South because you can get away with some of those like loving colloquialisms like, hey, sweet child, or hey, dear. And it just takes me a long way.
That is really funny. So how far into your teaching life are you?
So this would be year 11.
Okay.
If we are counting. I did take 2 years though in that time span and went back to grad school. So I taught for 3 years, did the master's in choral conducting, and then have been teaching here for 5. Yeah, so that would be 10 years. Um, yeah, but I actually am kind of branching out, which we might get to in a bit. And I'm stepping away from the classroom this year and
Wow.
going back to school. Yeah,
Okay.
and not to get a DMA, but to follow a similar passion of mine, and I'm going to get an MBA.
Interesting. Okay. So looking at a career change away from choral music or away from teaching in a traditional classroom?
This is probably one of my favorite questions now. I think so many times as choral educators, how often do we try to convince kids like, I don't need you to major in music, you can be in choir and be a doctor or be I don't know, a landscaper, whatever you want to do, right? We really promote that you can do other things in addition to choral singing, and I'm hoping to kind of live that life now by being a choral director and also working in business. A big passion of mine is teaching choir directors how to manage the business side of what we do
Hmm.
so much better because we receive so little training, and so much of what I do well, not so much of what I do, but a lot of my headaches and things that I've dread have been around running the business side of things, and it's always interested me.
Hmm.
um, and so I'm really excited to kind of take this direction, but that's where having choir baton in my life is going to be my direct lifeline into the industry still. And I have a lot of things lined up online, and even in regards to teaching, some things that are going to be coming out soon. So
Very cool. Very
yeah, away from in the traditional sense, but still here and serving hopefully in a different capacity.
cool. Right.
Um,
Yeah, that's awesome. I had this very strange experience walking down the street last week in Key West, and I was there with my family. My dad lives there, so I was visiting him and using his house while he was on his boat. He's old and retired, so he just goes out on his boat. And I I'm 12 years away from where I could retire, which just blew my mind because I had not yet thought about it. Like
right.
I turned 40 in a month, and I had not yet ever yet thought about like when I would actually retire. And that was a very surreal experience because I was walking down the street next to my wife, and I said, in 12 years, if I chose to, we could be walking down this same street, and I could be entering my last year teaching, and I would only be 52. What am I going to do then? And so for me, I don't know. I have not decided, and my plan is to not decide. I plan to teach as long as I love teaching. and
Right.
I currently love it. I get excited about it. It gets me up in the morning and gets me going. And my students, there's nothing that could separate me from that right now. But
Yeah.
I can totally see, it's actually kind of funny because I followed at the school I teach at. I followed a mentor of mine, Carla Oliver, who had taught there for 26 years prior, and I was her assistant for 3 years before she retired, and then I kind of took over that position. And I remember when she was in her last couple of years as a young teacher, because at that point I was 25, 26, thinking, how can she just walk away? Like, does she not love teaching? And
Right.
it was such a naive position. But now I can, after all the spending time with my family and seeing my kids grow up and wanting to eventually think about being able to follow them around and be a grandpa, and like it's so weird that I can actually picture that now. Like I can actually picture saying, you
Yep.
know what? Oh, I could walk away from this in 12 to 15 years and go do other things and be absolutely fine. So it's really it's surreal to think about all the other options, because it's I don't think music teachers are really taught to be very entrepreneurial and think of themselves in the business world. So this,
But we run small businesses,
yeah, yeah. What do you mean?
right?
Yeah, tell us what you mean by that.
Well, it depends. There's several different angles you can look at it. In some ways, our students are our product, if you will, right? That we are wanting to build and develop, and there's processes that we put in place uh, to grow them and make them better. In a choral world, you could look at the music as the product, right? And your students are your team, your workers that you're managing, directing, coaching to ensure that they deliver a really great product in terms of music. And then how you define that product of music, right? What is successful music? What does that product look like? Is it is it going to be a lot of kids singing? Is it going to be kids singing that are singing really excellent music? Is it going to be kids singing all across the country and world? Is it going to be uh, two-thirds of your student population? There's just a lot of different ways in which you can define a successful product if you think of the music as a product. And I think so many times what I have struggled with, and I think we struggle with as an arts community, is when we hear business and we hear like product and money and all of these things, we feel as if it separates it from the genuinity, that's a word, from the genuineness of the art. Like it makes it less of an art. But
Well, and then
that's
yeah,
what's holding
the
us
first
back.
first thing I'll say is genuinity is now a word
Yes.
officially. Yeah, it has been coined. But I hear exactly what you're saying. I think when most of us in the education, I would even broaden it to say the education community, here's the terms business or customer service or creating a product in the classroom, we bristle, and I think that's unfortunate because it might shorten our sights a little bit on what we could achieve with our students. And here's, I think ultimately it comes down to most of us are public school educators, and and I've talked about this on the show actually before. In some of the first few episodes, we talked about this concept that we are paid for by taxpayers, most of us, uh, but that doesn't change. It doesn't make us special. We're still providing a service that people paid for and expect to get a good product in return. Now, of course, there's all kinds of political debates you could get into about whether or not people should have more choice in how they, school choice is a big debated topic all the time. Which but it doesn't. Wherever you stand on that issue, in my mind, it doesn't matter because ultimately people are still working in the community to pay for what we do, and they should and they deserve our customer service. They deserve our response to them and to their kids, at no different in my mind than if they were private school students paying a tuition. That's so that public. I'm not sure if you're public school or private school, but to me, it's no different.
Yeah, I think we can kind of get a little dicey when we think about like the service that we owe to our parents and students. I agree with that, but I also think we have to be careful because that does not necessarily mean that they're entitled to a certain regard. Like, what are they entitled to? Are they entitled to getting what they want, or are they entitled to the best education? And then that feeds into I believe they're entitled to the best education, not getting what they want. And I'd venture to say you're the
Yeah,
same.
agreed.
Right. So then that means that the public has to recognize teachers as professionals with what they do.
Hmm.
And that's, I think, where we misstep a lot because the public does not perceive teachers as professionals always. They don't always perceive us as professionals, as people that have gone to school for this, that there's a science and a theory and work behind education. They think that because they've gone to school, they understand what it's like to be a teacher in the profession.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I think, um, I think a lot of those terms that you were introducing, the business related terms, and obviously that's
Mhm.
something you're interested in. If you're going back to do an MBA, that you're gonna you're gonna get a lot of those terms, I'm sure, over the next couple of years. But I think again, it comes back to teachers feeling like, and this is, I guess, some tea that I'll spill, but I feel like this is true. We think we're special. We think that, I used the example on an earlier episode on choralosophy of, uh, I even hear a lot of rhetoric in choir world where very much people who might be perceived as promoting their ability, their product, their brand as choral professionals is about the worst thing you can do. They see it as egotistical. They see it as um, self promotion. Very recently heard a whole bunch of people talking about at a convention about the value of all the choir directors that don't promote themselves. And I'm sitting, and of course, I'm looking around the room. Everybody's nodding. Oh, yes, almost as if we're in church. And I'm sitting here. Why? What other profession doesn't have to promote themselves?
Right.
Why are we special? And I think the answer to that is that most of our salaries are paid for by taxes. We don't have to promote ourselves. So we've kind of grown up with this, like, almost, not to say that we're wealthy, because we're not, but in the sense it's a silver spoon in our mouth where the paycheck just comes and the pay raise just comes, whether we're bad at teaching or not, or not, it just keeps coming. And so I think if we had a little bit more of that mentality of that, I want to um, create an environment where I can become really, really good at something and then capitalize off of that and not have to feel like I'm apologizing for it.
Mhm. Oh, there's so much we could unpack with that. But I also think we've lived in an age where we haven't always had to self promote too, because choir is wonderful, choir is this, that, and the other. And now we're getting to a point in time where we don't, more people should be singing, right? And I know that ACDA just released their document that says that choral groups are on the rise within America, which is great. And I am a member of ACDA. I'm not knocking ACDA, but I think that we also need to, like, I'm interested to look more into that research. And okay, I think it was on choral organizations, or was it actual singers? Do you know?
I think it's actual singers,
Okay.
which again, that's where you can make statistics look like anything you want. The bottom line is the population of the United States and of the world is growing, and so any activity could be shown to be growing because we're making babies all the time. So
Right.
uh,
Right. And that's kind of where my frustration began to lie in the classroom, is that I was beating my head up against the wall to promote choral singing. Now, and there's a lot tied to this and why I'm stepping away from the classroom. So this is just one small facet. But and honestly, it's kind of a mission of mine through Choir Baton, is that I got so tired of trying to promote people to join choir because they're so inhibited by choir culture.
Huh.
And choir culture being, you're a good singer, you're a bad singer. You can read music, you can't read music. How are we teaching people that their voice is enough, that yes, choir is about being the best you can be, but we want you to enter where you're at. You don't have to come with a prepared song and aria and sight read 18 measures to come and join this choir.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we're going to see less and less people that can respond to that sort of model, particularly as they get older, versus especially if they didn't get that training in elementary, middle, and high school. So what I found was I was just really struggling to recruit because there was not a culture of singing. And for me, that was a bigger issue that I'm hoping to begin to address. And honestly, you're doing it as well, right? We're doing it by building these conversations for people to learn more about choir through podcasts, even.
Right. I agree. And I the way I think of it is, and this kind of still ties back into the business entrepreneurship of our profession, which I'm so frustrated that that I seem to see this mentality of that being a bad thing as much as I do, because it's, in my opinion, is short-sighted. I mentioned this before. It's short-sighted because, I'll just take myself as an example because that's the only person I can speak with authority on is myself. Is I do a lot of stuff, outside of the classroom. A lot of stuff. I run a nonprofit. We run a choral institute. I direct a professional choir, and I do a podcast. And up until 6 months ago, I'd been doing church music on top of that. And so I do a lot of stuff that is one way of looking at it could be all those things distract or take attention away from my classroom teaching, and might mean I'm not giving my students my full attention. Okay, I think that's a bunch of crap, because I know from my own experience how much better in the classroom I've become by branching myself out and giving real world experience in music for my students, because I can not only talk to them about the music knowledge that I bring to them, but I can also give them the performer's perspective on things. And I can say, hey, tonight I'm going to go be right where you are as I'm singing in the choir. Right. I'm still singing. I'm still, involved in those things, and I'm entrepreneurial, which means that my face is out there a lot. My opinions now through the podcast are out there a lot. And in a lot of ways, what that's doing, if more of us would embrace that kind of an idea, what we would be doing is building the choral pie so that there is more and more visibility of choral music in the general community. Because
Right.
if we don't try to, as we were talking about a second ago, population is growing, which means that also opportunities to divert people's attention to other art forms and other things is also growing. The more people there are, the more things there will be you could choose to do. And so
Absolutely.
we have to, as choral professionals, have to work to keep our art form visible to the broader community. And
But I think, sorry, go ahead.
I'm almost done. So with this little rant. So if people are looking negatively at the idea that somebody might put their choir video on Facebook and promote it to a larger Facebook audience, trying to get likes and comments and shares, and oh, look at that, that's an egotistical conductor. But who is it harming? Number one. Number two, are we not then, let's say 1,000 people see that video in its first day, which is typical for a video that I would put online. What if 100 of those people that saw and enjoyed that video had never heard a really good choir before? Well, what we've done is we've just grown the choral pie.
Right. Well, it goes back to this mindset, and I haven't yet decided if it's been a broader cultural mindset or just a personal mindset that I've lived in my life in various different capacities that manifests itself in choir world that I've seen, is this concept of scarcity versus abundance.
Yes. Are we gonna talk about economics?
Oh, okay. Well, I haven't finished the economics section yet of my MBA math prereq. So let me finish that and then we'll go there. But it's talking about, it's exactly what we're doing right here, right? So honestly, I could have looked at you having a podcast and go, well, crap, there's another podcast out there. Like, they are taking listeners from me. I'm using air quotes with this. It's videoed, so you
Yeah.
can see. I gotta remember that.
If you're on the YouTube channel, then well, yeah.
Yeah, if you're on the YouTube channel, go see my messy office behind me. So, but right, like they're taking listeners, or what if they're better than me, or it's that constant competition. Whereas it's like, screw that,
Mhm.
right? It's the same thing where if your video that you post on YouTube gets 1,000 likes, that doesn't mean that your same YouTube video can get 1,000 likes, or even there's a million concepts of that. But it is, we are taught to be scarcely minded, when really, if you show up to the table, there is room for you too, sister.
Hmm. Yeah, and I would say I feel like I know the answer to your question of whether or not that's a broader cultural or societal concept, and I think it is. It's not just a choral one. It's one that exists. In fact, all you have to do is watch presidential debates to know that most people, I would say, and this is not a on both sides of our two-party system.
Right.
Both most people believe in what economists would call the fixed pie fallacy of economics, which is that all we have to do in order to create a just society is look at this finite pie of wealth that exists in the world. And as long as we divide it up equally amongst everyone, or the right proportion goes to the right groups of people, or whatever it is, then everything will be fine. The reality is that's not how wealth works. And it's also not how into the intellectual exchange of ideas work. Those wealth, for example, is changing every millisecond. It's constantly changing, and the pie is growing. And so one of my favorite analogies for this is if I were to ask you, there are two pizzas laying out on a table, and if I were to say,
I want them both.
yeah, right,
Yes.
okay, you're right. You'll have a chance to choose your flavor here in a second. So if there's two pizzas laying out on the table, and I were to ask you, would you like one half of the pizza on your left, or would you like 1/4 of the pizza on the right? What would you ask, or what would you answer?
Half, always. I mean, I'd want both, but
Okay, so I tricked you,
yeah.
because the correct answer is to first ask which pizza is bigger.
Yeah.
Okay, because a quarter of a extra large pizza from Emo's might be actually more pizza than the half of a personal pan pizza or whatever, right? So, and that's kind of how economics works. Is we see ourselves, and this ties right into what we were talking about. It's also how choral attention from the public works, in the sense that there isn't a constant set of eyes and ears staring at their computer screens. And if you're watching my podcast, you're not watching Beth's. It's the people's behavior is super complicated, and we can't predict it. And nobody can predict it. You'd have to have an AI computer that's just like off the charts intelligent to be able to predict what we're all going to do, all 7 billion of us. So our best bet is to do what you just said, which is that we all get out there and present our point of view, our product, our statements to the world, and we just kind of have to hope people care.
Well, and here's the thing: if we care, people care.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right? And you also have to look, if you care and you really care and you want to make one person's life better, then it's just that one person that you have to lean into. And that, if that's what makes all the difference, I think then people begin to struggle with numbers and all this kind of stuff. But I love the pizza analogy, and now I'm just dreaming of pizza. But I'm so interested. I mean, I don't know a ton about you and your backstory. It sounds like you walked into a really cool teaching gig. Are you from the Midwest? Tell us a little bit about you for Choir Baton listeners that don't know you.
Yeah. So in fact, I guess I'll just start by sharing. You mentioned that I have a cool job, which I do. I think in the broader spectrum, or the broader sense of high school choir positions in the country,
Yeah.
it's a pretty unique situation. I'm at a high school in Lee's Summit, Missouri, which is south of Kansas City, just touches Kansas City to the south. And
it's an interesting place because from the choral music standpoint, has been a high school choir program that has been huge and highly functioning since like the 1940s. So it's got a huge a history of having very well staffed, oftentimes two choir directors. They had two choir directors full time back in the 70s, which is just crazy,
Wow.
especially in the Midwest. One of the first Midwestern high schools to have a dedicated men's chorus, and that also happened back in the 60s and 70s. And so it's a really the tradition of the school and of the community for choral music is part of what creates that unique flavor. Add on top of that an administration that really supports and understands the value of what we do, and we are treated very with almost, well, I hate to say this because of the analogy and what it implies, but we're almost treated like a sport, in the sense that we get good funding for things, we get good support from administrators who understand our value and all of that. And I started there after 2 years teaching. Well, first of all, I grew up in that town, so I grew up in Lee
Okay.
Summit, and so I started out there in my choir life there, and then I went to teach at another school district nearby after I graduated from college. That was very much the opposite of that. I had my first job was culture shock for me coming from Lee Summit, and then I had a principal who, my first boss, who said verbatim, choir should be seen and not heard. And which, if you just think about that for a second, it just doesn't make any sense. But he
Right.
actually said that, and it was also a school where uh, their stated policy towards choir is something that any kid could do and be in. So that's just the place where the counselors get to put the kids who aren't good at other things. That was how it was thought of. And so that was good. Honestly, that was really good training for me.
Absolutely.
To start in that environment. And then this is a cool story. And then I'm going to ask you some similar questions so we can get back at it. But um, the job that I have now, at least I'm at high school, the way that started was a really interesting story involving Carla Oliver, who I mentioned before, who
Mhm.
was my mentor and predecessor there. Uh, the town was growing, and they built a new high school. Okay, and the school that I teach at and Carla and I taught at together was the original high school in town. So they they built a new one, and the way they chose to handle it at the time was to pull one choir teacher. There were two. Pull one to the new high school and leave one at the other high school, and that worked okay for a little while until the town grew back to where the schools were their original size, essentially. And we get to the point where I'm about to finish my master's degree. I had finished my 1 year of coursework, and then I had a second year of doing a thesis and conducting recital and all these things to
Yep.
do. Kind of busy work. And I'm in that portion of my master's degree, working at a
Were you
church.
full time? Okay.
Um, Full-time student. Yeah, I was a
Yeah.
grad ass, teaching at the college and all that good stuff. So I'm working at a church and doing church music for kind of some part-time income during that time, and I hear
Yep.
that Carla is by herself, at least I'm at high school, with close to 400 students because they still had not replaced her staff, and she's about to go crazy and about to retire early because just it's too much of a job. And so I made an off the cuff comment, which I didn't really even intend to follow up on, to one of her colleagues in the school district, where I said, well, I don't have any classes in the mornings right now that I have to take. I'm just taking them for extra classes. I can just go help. And I just said it kind of joking, like half joking,
Right.
not thinking anything would come of it. Yeah, I get a phone call 2 days later from her, and she says, "I hear you've told somebody that you're willing to come help." And at this point, I'm thinking, help means I'll come do some sectionals, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and so I'll come and do some sectionals every once in a while. And I say, "Yeah, sure, I'll come just whenever you need me." And she goes, "Oh no, we need you every day." And I said, "Well, okay, hold on. What what do you mean? What are we talking about?" She goes, "Well, I've been given permission to hire you." And I was like, "Oh, all right."
And so I basically, I had about 24 hours to figure this out. I went to the school, to UMKC, where I was, and I dropped all the classes that I was taking in the mornings because I didn't need any of them. They were just electives and extra credits while I finished my thesis. And I started the next day working as classified staff, paid by the hour, which was great. It was like, at that point, it was my third year of teaching high school, but I didn't have to go to any teachers' meetings. I didn't have to do any PD. I just showed up when choir started and left when choir was done. And then the next year, I had finished my master's degree, and they went ahead and hired me officially as a regular teacher, and I've been there ever since.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So
always
your
the
turn.
power of suggestion.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And making myself available
Right.
was a big part of that story. All right. So your turn. Where do you come from?
I am a Southern girl. I went to the majority of my schooling was in North Carolina, and when I graduated from high school, was involved in choir all 4 years. Never before then. I only joined choir when I was in a freshman. I loved it, but I did not want to be a teacher because I wanted to make money. And I wanted to get out of North Carolina. And so I went to a really small private school. I was a third generation student but it was in Nashville, Tennessee. Really struggling there. And I went as a music business major, ironically. And a year into the program, a couple things were going on. One, I was not really impressed with how the degree was set up. And I still, music entrepreneurship is such a big thing, as is arts entrepreneurship and arts administration. And I think there's places for that, but I felt like I really either needed to go music ed or full business. And I'm going to be honest with you because I'm just now getting to a point in my life where I can talk about this. Um, you know, whether it's been explicitly said to young girls or it's just been something implicitly that we pick up. For me, it was implicit. My parents had never said this, but it's what kind of career can you have and be married and raise a family with? And because that's an important part of growing up and being an adult. And I was raised in a very Christian background, very conservative, where that's what my mom had done, both my grandmothers had done. And there was this part in my brain that said, being a music teacher will always allow me to be a great wife and mother. And I loved music teaching. I loved it. And I don't regret it to this point, to this day. But 10 years after the fact, or I guess longer than that now, I can look back and know that I made that decision partially because I felt like that was a better route to go as a female, to have a wife and have kids. And so I taught for 3 years, great 6th through 12th grade program, like some of the brightest students in the state of Tennessee. They were number like 2 or 3 ranked school. It was utopia. And people always told me when I was teaching there, they were like, you realize you never want to leave because there was no discipline problems. The kids, again, were brilliant, really great administration. But because it was an academic magnet school, it was really hard to grow the program because of the pressure that the students had to take AP and honors classes. And I really, at that point in my mind, successful choral music education was a large choir because I was trying to teach a program like I had grown up in, and I knew that was not going to be attainable there. So I came to a split in the road, like, do I go and get an MBA, what I've always wanted to do? Do I go and do music or business, or do I go and do music? And a couple things happened that steered me towards music. And so I went and got the master's there. Loved it. Really great program. When I finished the master's, I thought, at this point I'm 27, I think, still single. I was living across the country in Arizona, and I loved the people in Arizona, but I hated being across the country from all of my family. family. So I thought, I'm going to move back to Raleigh where my parents are. Didn't have a job lined up, but knew something would happen. It's a big metro area, a lot of stuff happening. And taught at 3 schools in 5 years, which is not the road that I wanted to take. I wanted to go and find that bit like that I dream ideal high school position and stay there for years. And the irony of all of this, Chris, is that I am at the school that I just left is that school, is my dream teaching school. Like I walked away from my dream school that had a long history of choral music, great community support, was as close to a place where I could replicate my high school choral experience in that environment. And I walked away, and a big part of it was because I got to the age of 32 and I'm still not married and I still don't have kids. And I realized that I was kind of planning a lot of my life along the fact of waiting for that to potentially happen.
Mm.
And still with the mindset of being a high school music teacher would be a great way for me to still like run a small business. And because again, I firmly believe it's running a small business and make music, which I adore, and empowering students and community members through choral singing. But like I had this other part of my life that I was waiting to begin, and I have no control over that. And we could talk about like the constructs with which people place upon people as they are dating or not dating, or in relationships, not relationships. But I said, now is like my time. I wanted to be brave, and I was strong enough in my understanding of being a musician and being a choral conductor to know that if I walk away from this school and this amazing teaching position to pursue this other passion of mine, I'm leaning into a dream that I've always had that I wasn't allowing myself to consider because of what I thought I needed to do for this other dream of mine to be a wife and mother. And then like I can be a musician, I can be a choral conductor, I can be in choral music and not be in a high school classroom on a regular, consistent basis. And that, but I mean, I had to be ready for the repercussions that would come from walking away from this. And there have been repercussions. Like people, I had lunch with my old church choir members, and randomly a friend had flown in to see us, or to see me, and met up with us at lunch because of when her flight got there. And one of my former church choir members leaned over to her and said, I'm just really worried about Beth. She's really letting go of some of her talents by leaving the classroom. Or I also had another colleague that was like, I would rather beep 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 than go to business school. Or they just don't understand or see how I can be both. And that's okay. Like I'm okay with that now, but I also had to get into a place in my life and a feeling of being comfortable of who I am and who I'm trying to be and who I want to be, and be ready to take the backlash and the opinions that other people are going to have. And that's okay. I welcome their opinions. It means they care about me. I don't doubt that these people care. But yeah, that's kind of like a whole roundabout thing of how and why. But I'm committed to being a choral conductor. I'm committed to this business of helping other people be a part of something greater than themselves by singing with others. And how that's going to look in the next couple of years, I don't know. But I also know that I'm following this dream and this passion of mine, and I can use that to help our industry as well.
Wow. Does that feel better to get all that off your chest?
Well, it's just something that I'm passionate about. And I don't think people understand. We don't talk a ton about being a female choral conductor, what that looks like and means. I had a really great conversation with a former parent this morning about it that was saying, like, her high school daughter has been trying to figure out what she might want to consider majoring in. And so much of what her considerations for majoring were on, like, what she might want to, like, how she would support being a wife and mother. And I think it's an important conversation for us to talk about as choral directors, because we are second parents for these students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think as there, yes, you're right. That is a dynamic that is probably under discussed. But again, I would say a broader cultural thing and not just a choir thing.
But it influences choir.
No, I agree.
Dramatically.
No, I agree. But I don't think it originates in choir. I think is my point is that women definitely spend more time thinking as they grow up about how their career choices might be compatible with motherhood. Whereas
and marriage and but we see that manifest itself within this career of choral conducting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think in the way it manifests itself is that you see a huge disparity between choral conductors who are male at the high school level, collegiate level, versus music teachers at the elementary school level who are widely female. Because I think that's part of the consideration. Young women start thinking, well, if I do elementary school, I'm not going to have all of the after school stuff. I'm not going to have all the evening stuff that a high school choir director does. I'm not going to have to go to festivals on a Saturday, all those types of things. It's more compatible with motherhood. And I've heard those conversations happen with female friends for years. But I think the reasons that we don't have those conversations as much as we should is because people are afraid that having those conversations will include lobbing like sexism grenades and and whereas it oftentimes those types of things are way more complicated than somebody's sexist. So for example, I would make the argument that the reason that there are less women choral conductors at the collegiate level is not because colleges are sexist and don't want to hire women, but it's because there are less of them to choose from. There aren't as many that go for that because of what you just said.
Exactly.
And so I think it sounds like you're doing, and I definitely applaud what it sounds like you're trying to do, which is to say, I'm going to live my life the way that my dream says that and my heart says that I should. And if there's a marriage and kids out there for me, then I'm going to find it on that path rather than on a path, a predetermined path. It sounds like that's what you're doing.
Right. And I think that it's just also so important for us to encourage young women to not have that mindset as a music educator that you can't do both.
Right. And I on that, I totally agree. And here'd be like kind of an out there way to think of it. Like, let's say there's the young Beth, which by the way, my wife's name is Beth, so it's objectively the best of all female names. But
is she a Beth or a Bethany or Elizabeth?
She is just Beth.
Even better. Likewise.
Really? Yeah. That's she's not short for anything.
Yeah.
So let's say there's the young music teacher or the young potential female music teacher who starts to have these thoughts. Then the thought experiment that I would suggest to them, and I've talked to lots of high school kids about their career journeys using similar Jedi mind tricks, but you say, like, all right, so you're going to pick a career that you feel like is more beneficial or more compatible with motherhood and being a wife. Okay, fine. If that's like a really high priority for you to build your life around that. But how do you know that by going down that path, you're going to even not even meet your potential husband someday because maybe he's at business school?
Or wife.
Or wife, right.
Yeah.
Mate, your mate, your spouse. I don't really believe in like soulmates in a cosmic sense. Like there's like a predetermined person that's put on earth for you or any of that kind of stuff. But the philosophical underpinning of that is when you live your life based on what you assume will happen in the future, then you're always going to be taking door number one when the correct answer could have been door number two. And so there is no way we can avoid that problem as humans where we don't know what's going to happen. So my advice is always just to do what your spirit, your heart, your mind, your reason, your intellect says to do that is best for you. And maybe future spouse or love of your life is down door number two and you chose door number one. Right. And so
or not.
Mm-hmm.
And if he's not there, that's okay too. I think it goes down to things we can control and things we can't control.
Mm-hmm.
So often we try to live our lives based on things we can't control.
Right.
Okay, enough about me though. I am so curious more about choralosophy and the heart of talking through things, which is what we've just done here as I've shared some of my journey and your passion to bring this into fruition through choralosophy.
Yeah, so I've been doing quite a few episodes lately with other content creators like yourself, bloggers, other podcasters. I've had 4 or 5 such episodes already. And one of the reasons I've done that is because I'm fascinated by other people who kind of gravitate towards conversation and feeling like it's important. Because there definitely is a group of a mentality, I should say, in a broader cultural one that exists also in the choral world that sharing your opinions in public is something that you shouldn't do. You should just keep to yourself. And it's like the old adage of never talk about politics or religion, that kind of thing. And I think all that does, in my mind, is to start a culture where, because at the underpinning of that idea of don't talk about politics and religion is because someone might disagree with you. Well, right there, in my mind, we have created a cultural problem. What is so wrong with someone disagreeing with you? When did that become a scary thing unless we have lost the art of conversation? And I think in a lot of ways in my lifetime, as the advent of social media and the growth of the way of using social media to communicate, we are losing the art of conversation. And I think there is a beautiful thing about the podcast medium that allows a renaissance, you might say, or a resurrection of conversation as being a way that people start to understand ideas. And just I guess the answer to your question, the shorter answer to your question is, why did I start the show in the first place? Well, that's essentially why. My inspiration for starting the show and including parts of the word philosophy in the title of the show ultimately came from a problem as what I saw as my way of helping to solve something that I saw as a problem, which was that in our profession, again, just a microcosm of the world at large, seeing what I saw as a degradation of the way people spoke to each other. I mean, just go on Facebook groups like I'm a choir director, or that's a funny story. So I got kicked off of that page about a year and a half ago for telling one of the admins who was behaving unprofessionally that he was behaving unprofessionally. In essentially, I won't go into the whole thing, but basically he was calling one of my good friends a sexist, misogynist, something, for disagreeing with him about a conversation they were having. And there was just nothing that could be further from the truth. Like that, that's not who this guy was, and that's not what was motivating him. And there were calls to dox him and to out people to his employer, and like all this kind of stuff going on in that page. And I said, guys, could we stop talking to each other like this? This is unprofessional. I was blocked within a seconds, and that's all I did. And so I started thinking, this is ridiculous. Like, why can't we disagree and just have conversations? This is choir, guys. It's not like we're not curing cancer. Our profession as musicians is important, of course, but we aren't special. and I think I see too much of that, and I see I guess a lack of desire to just talk out our disagreements. And even when it's as trivial as, how are you do based minor or law based minor, people will get pissed off having that conversation, and that just blows my mind. Like, calm down. So I guess that would be my answer to why this show exists in a distilled story, which is my show's goal is to just calm the rhetoric and speak to each other. And maybe we'll get to some disagreement, but maybe we'll get to some underlying agreements.
Right.
So that's what we've been doing so far, and it's been really fun. I have the same question to turn around to you, with Choir Baton. First, a simple question: how long ago did you start the show?
January.
January. Okay, so we're about the same age. This one started in February, so we're both pretty babies at this. So what was your why? What was your underlying problem that you were trying to solve?
Yeah. I think it was conversations with people in choir about really how different and yet similar we are. And talking with each other also about life, which, as you can tell from my previous rant, I feel as though it really intertwines with choir. But I love hearing people's stories, and I think I've loved listening to choir podcasts throughout the last couple of years and the different ones that are there. But so many of them, for me, always focus on the director. And I think that's really great and valuable. I mean, I am a director. I also think that we would not have choirs without people singing in them. And so often a podcast with freedom that I could interview directors if I wanted to, but that was also interviewing with different singers and different choir administrators, just different people that are a part of this journey of choral music making, and hearing about their stories and hearing about their why. So, an episode a while back with Drew Fifield, who I connected with. We've never met. He sings in the New York City Gay Men's Chorus, and he is also the head of something cool at Industrious, right? Like learning and development or something like that at Industrious. And Industrious is a co-working space. It's one of the largest. It's still considered, I think, a startup, but they've just secured like Series C funding. Anyways, they're huge. But here is this guy that spends a large part of his day like running that world, but then he also spends a lot of his time committed to choir. And why, and what does that do for you, and what do you get out of it? Because when I hear stories like that, it reminds me of my why as a conductor. And so I just wanted to engage with people about that, and just build conversations, because I think we're all, as it also stemmed from, I was going to answer this short, clearly that's not happening. So Choir Baton actually didn't start as a podcast. It started as an Instagram takeover account.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So a year ago, last March, I launched it, if you will, and it was designed to highlight a day in the life of choirs across the country and ultimately across the world. And what I found was we had an awesome response immediately when I was reaching out and connecting with people I knew that taught in Alaska, Arizona, California, just through different ways that I've met people. But once I stopped having that personal connection with people, and even people that I did have personal connections with, they didn't get it because this was a year ago, and we're always a little bit behind the curve. But B, people were terrified of putting themselves out there. People were terrified of posting videos of them singing a warm up or showing inside of their classroom. Or they were afraid of judgment. They were afraid that it wasn't good enough. They were afraid that they weren't good at, like, all of these fears, which I understand because I also at times, I mean, I still experience them, right? Some even time, like every time before I go to like launch an episode, I'm still like, um, but golly, we are doing amazing things. And I got tired of people not feeling as if they were good enough. And so I said, well, how can I encourage people? How can I motivate? How can I share other stories to remind them why? And I was into podcasts. I had met a friend online that does a Crushing Classical. It's a really cool podcast on classical musicians that are making a living for themselves in unique ways. And we met, and I connected with Ann Molesky of Anacrusic Music, who's an elementary music podcaster, and they were really helpful in getting me going and kicking my butt and say run with it. And so I think we're like on a similar episode count too, about like 16 episodes plus some extras with a couple of 2-part episodes. So it has been, like I shared with you, more work I think than I realized, but also more invigorating than I realized as well.
Yeah, it has been very rewarding, and you touched on something that sounds like a similarity to my, I guess you could say my inspiration. Also, if my top inspiration was wanting to elevate the discourse that I was seeing online, I think that close second would be something you just touched on, which is seeing and wanting to help people feel supported and validated in their own quality of work. And so one of the things that I've tried to do, by bringing on all the guests that I've tried to find, was to find ways to promote what their work is too. Because again, it goes back to this fixed pie fallacy thing we were talking about before. I want to promote other people's work. The show is not just about promoting my work. I want to grow the whole choral pie so that there's more choirs, more people singing, more community organizations, more funding for the arts coming from because that's only going to come when more people have transformative choir experiences that when they grow up and start controlling somebody's money, they're going to say, oh, I want more people to have experience with that. Just like my dad, who has quite a bit of his own money. And one of the things that he does is he gives a lot of it away. He gives a lot of money away to organizations that he saw as transformative to him when he was a child. Well, that's what most people with money do. So if we ever want to see funding for choral music and for the arts increase, we need to impact lives.
Right.
Again, it goes back to we're not special. We have to do the work in order for people to then turn around and say, for example, my dad's thing was the YMCA. My dad had a drunk father who was never around when he was a kid, and to keep himself out of trouble, he could go to the YMCA and play basketball and have mentorship and all of that. So now he gives a crap ton of money to the YMCA because they impacted him when he needed it the most. Well, our job, if we want to have people who like my dad who have money someday grow up and say, I want to support a choral organization that gives back in the community and gives music education, a children's choir, something, whatever it is, well, then we're going to have to impact that person while they're a kid. So I think when I think of choir is a business and that we are customer service people, then I'm thinking of everybody, not because they might give us money someday, but I'm thinking of everybody as a potential young person to be impacted that might turn around and pay it forward at some point in the future to grow the choral pie. So all of those things are goals, I guess you could say, for the show.
I love that. I've so enjoyed just kind of hearing a little bit about you, and that's so interesting with your life story. How did you get involved with choir? Is your dad a big basketball person still?
Well, no, not so much. He played basketball in college, and it was a coach, baseball coach actually. So he was more of a baseball person, but did play basketball. In fact, he was a baseball coach for the first 7 years of my life out of college. And so I kind of grew up on the field with him and with his players and all of that. But my mother was an elementary school music teacher. And
Okay.
yeah, and my grandmother was a piano professor. In fact, still teaches piano at her ripe old age, but was a college professor in piano. And so music has been in my family for as long as I can remember. But most of it came from my mom's side. But one of the things
Yeah.
that I guess plays into my story as it relates to my dad is that he was a very successful businessman. He's now retired, as I mentioned earlier. Um, but one of the things to his credit that I could say has very greatly impacted the career that I've had is that he never once that I can remember tried to talk me out of doing music, because I have so many of my students who have successful business parents, that's like the worst thing you could tell their kid to do or think that their kid could do was to do music, because I wouldn't make enough money or whatever. Because I knew back when I was coming out of high school that my dad would have loved it if I would say, "Hey, Dad, I'd like to work for the family business and take it over someday, or what, teach me your ways or whatever." Because every dad would love
Right.
their kid to say that. But I've always been I've always been a musician. Everybody knew I was a musician since I was 5. It's just never been a question. And he was always very supportive of that, and would go bragging to his rich guy friends about his choir director's son, and they would always give him funny looks. And so I've always had that support career wise, but I think I also inherited some of his entrepreneurial spirit, in the sense that I heard him so many times talking to his employees, because I worked for the company for a while as like a side job when I was younger, and I'd hear him talking about his why for running a business, which is that obviously businesses make money, and they've got to make money to stay alive. But he would always make sure his employees knew that we don't make money if we don't go look for spots of pain and try to solve their pain, because that's why people make purchases. That's why people hire service people. That's why because they've
Right.
got some kind of pain that they need to have relieved. And so my entrepreneurial side of my choir world has been to look into the world, into our profession, and see where the pain is, and see if I can do anything about it. And if I can get a sponsor for a podcast to pay me some money to do that, then that's a win-win.
Right.
I'm not there's nothing inherently wrong with that, because that's
Yeah.
just kind of how the world works when we if people are voluntarily spending their time and money on a resource, that's a good thing for everybody. And so I think those are the lessons that I learned from that.
I think that's huge, and such a great kind of wrap up of what we've talked about is really just finding ways in which we can help. And your dad must be so proud of you with with all of the different ventures you have.
Yeah, I think I think that would be accurate, in the sense that his pride wouldn't come from the fact that I have all these different ventures per se. I think he would be proud because I'm trying to leverage my expertise to a broader impact. Because in
Right.
his mind, as a business person, you grow your business by having your expertise that you bring to the quote market impact a broader market, and that is a sign that you are being successful. Now, for me,
Right.
that's not going to translate into millions of dollars. That's going to translate into a podcast with 500 listeners or whatever. That's not the same thing, but the principle is the same, which is that if I can impact a broader number of people, that means something I'm doing is right. And that would be true of Choir Baton as well. As your audience grows, that is only a symbol, or only a sign that you're doing something right. Because people aren't going to listen or follow or do your Instagram takeovers if it's not benefiting them in some way, or at the very least, they're not just having fun.
And by golly, we need more fun sometimes in this industry. Like you said, we're not curing cancer.
Right.
It's just choral music, and ways in which we can engage with each other like this is really cool. Well, Chris, thank you so much for having me as a guest on Choralosophy, and I am so excited to see what will continue with the podcast. And just like, I feel like are we friends now?
Yeah, it's official.
Okay.
Especially, I mean, because your name's Beth, so already I'm at a comfort level that is helpful.
Okay.
And thank you also, Beth, for having me as a guest on Choir Baton. We're going to share this audio with both of our audiences. And apologies at the end, we had quite a bit of internet connectivity problems, but I'll try to clean that up as best as I can. So thank you so much for this conversation. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And if people want to find you, they can go. I know you have a Facebook group, Choralosophers, right?
Yes, there is a Facebook group. It's intentionally being kept small, in the sense that
Absolutely. I love that.
yeah, I'm not trying to mass add people.
Right.
I'm trying to make it be that it's people who are listening to the show, so that it goes back to my inspiration of why to do the show in the first place, which is trying to avoid social media out of context conversations. So I do moderate that page pretty heavily. I'm not allowing like ads for choir festivals and YouTube videos to sell a sheet music or any of those types of things that you see on other Facebook groups. It's really designed for, hey, I listened to an episode. This was something that came to mind. I want to go talk about it with other people that listen to the episode so they actually have context. And then, of course, you can find me on Twitter at Choralosophy. Facebook and then Choralosophy Podcast has a Facebook page and an Instagram, which I don't use a whole lot, but it's there. And you can listen to the show on YouTube and all the podcast apps. Now, for Choir Baton, your Instagram, as you mentioned, is pretty active, and I've seen it quite a bit lately. I've been paying more attention to it and hadn't. And seeing some of the exchanges that you're doing and the takeovers that you're doing, that's a very cool concept.
Yeah, it's just cool. I've met some of my closest friends through Instagram. Is really where I hang out more than Facebook. Like my personal like they're both linked to Facebook pages, but I've always been a picture lover, a video lover, and so the fact that I can sign on there and just and see what's going on is really, really cool. So you can find me on Instagram most readily, probably, and then always showing up on Instagram stories. For myself is at Beth Philemon, and then Choir Baton is at Choir Baton. I have a weekly letter for Choir Baton that goes out. That if you're interested in doing a takeover, you can find the link there to sign up, and then I also send out a weekly letter that talks about life and choir and business school, and I hope it's a little motivation for your day, and you can sign up for that on my website as well. So we have some cool products coming out, and it's just an exciting time.
That's very cool.
Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of an episode. I hope you had just as much fun listening as I had making that episode. That was a blast talking to Beth and, of course, to Tim. Thanks to Graphite again for coming on board as our third sponsor. Don't forget to head to the sponsors' pages and services to give them your feedback by using Choralosophy at checkout at sightreadingfactory.com, ryanmain.com, and now graphitepublishing.com. Lets them know you're listening and lets them know you appreciate their support of this content. As always, the content itself is free, but making the show is not free. So there are all kinds of ways that you can help me keep this going so that it doesn't drain me to do this show. We're trying to spread the love just a little bit and get as many people on board the mission of this show, which is thoughtful conversation, in-depth, long-form discussion that we can't find in very many other venues on choral topics, the profession that we are so compassionate and passionate about. So help me out if you can. Here are the best ways. Of course, subscribe to the podcast. Actually, click the follow button, click the subscribe button. Leave a star rating if your app has that. Leave a comment or review if your app has that. On social media, if there was an episode that you really enjoyed, share it and comment about it. Say, hey, listen to this. I heard this really interesting perspective on this show. You should check it out. Other ways you can help, of course, more directly. you can head over to patreon.com/Choralosophy and become an official Choralosopher for as little as $3 a month. There are some new tiers on there now that you can check out, including a consultancy tier where for $20 a month, you're going to have access to me. That means a Skype call, 30 minutes every month, where I can help you deal with whatever it is that you're dealing with. This is especially in mind for those young educators that are getting out there into the profession. I'm getting ready to start year 17. And as you heard me talk about with Beth just now, already starting to think about what might be after my time in the choral classroom. So I've been around and been doing it, and I'd be happy to be a person that you bounce ideas off of. But for as little as $3 a month on there, you have access to the patron-only content that is available there, including behind-the-scenes episodes, the Choralosopher's Level Unlocked t-shirt, and all kinds of fun things, and I'm adding more fun things every month. So head over to patreon.com/Choralosophy and become an official Choralosopher, and don't forget to join us on the Facebook group to keep the conversation going. Thanks so much. See you next time.